Thank you. Get things going here. Okay, hang on a second. And you probably don't need me on the screen too much because I've been going through a lot of my presentation here. Oh, wow, this is awesome. Ooh, that's loud. Forgive me if my voice is starting to go already. I've been spending a lot of time talking with you guys out there. It's been wonderful. You know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Well, there you go. Shortest presentation I've ever done. Thank you very much. No, right? There you go. I've titled my presentation, Testing the Globe. Subtitle, Who Really Has the Intellectual High Ground in this discussion? You know, there's the four big questions mankind has wrestled with for millennia, right? Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I? How did I get here? I'm going to talk more. This is a two-part presentation. This will be more sort of the philosophical part, and then tomorrow I'll talk about the various physical evidences that push me over the edge, so to speak. So regarding the who am I question, you know, first of all, my name is Rob Skiba. The things that influenced my life, of course, my parents growing up. I have one sister not depicted here, but my family is very close. My dad was a Baptist minister when I was a kid. I've been in the church my whole life. As soon as I could read, I was reading the Bible. I had a King James Bible highlighted and annotated in grade school. Anytime the doors of the building were open, I was there. I accepted Christ as my Savior at age 7 and have been in some form of ministry my entire life. That was 1977 when that happened, and that just so happened to be the same year this movie came out, Star Wars, and of course that blew my young mind, like, wow, that was amazing. It had a profound influence on my life and led me to the career that I've chosen, that I do to this day as a filmmaker. Also, I made a public declaration at age 8. I said I will either be an astronaut, a filmmaker, or a movie star by the time I'm 30, or I'll be dead. And it wasn't because I had a death wish. I just figured when you're 8 years old, 30, like, that's old man, right? So my thinking was if I hadn't achieved any of those things by the time I was 30, it had to be because I was dead. I don't remember exactly when it was, but at some point in my young life, Jim Irwin, supposedly Apollo astronaut from, I think it was Apollo 15, came to our church and signed that picture of him allegedly on the moon, said, "Reach for your dreams, Rob, aim high." And I did. Immediately after I got out of high school, I joined the Army. Oh, and by the way, that's me at age 18 with a Star Wars bed sheet. Yeah. Hardcore science fiction nerd. Joined the military. My whole plan was to learn how to fly helicopters, get my commission, transfer over to the Air Force, learn how to fly jets, get into the space program. That was my ambition. That was my dream. That was what I was shooting for. Did very well at everything I did in the military. I excelled at. Was Soldier of the Year 1991 there. Became a pilot by the time I was actually on my 21st birthday. I was in flight school. And even after I got out of the military, that didn't work out. My plans, I had, it's a long story, I'll save that, but basically it was an issue that I thought I had with my heart that made me have to get a Class 1 flight physical and do a stress test and all this stuff that basically anytime I was applying for the next level of my training, I got bumped for things outside of my control. And then years later, Father confirmed to me, no, your heart's fine, that just wasn't my plan for you. All these years later, I look back now and say, thank God I never got into NASA. But I left the military in 1993 and, of course, continued to be a sci-fi geek. That's me going to Star Trek conventions in my 20s, hanging out with the Star Trek actors and stuff like that. So, yeah, there was no incentive whatsoever for me to get into this topic that I'm talking about here today, much less spend the rest of my life traveling around the world talking about it. Okay, now before getting into this topic, I like to say to people, look, there's a few things that you must keep in mind, and I talked about this at the press conference earlier this morning, and also if you saw my presentation I did last year, here are about half of the bullet points I talked about last year. First thing you need to realize when you get into this research is, look, we used to be you. If you're just getting into this and you're really skeptical and you don't believe in it, look, we get it. We were there. We were you. None of us belongs to the Flat Earth Society. Let's say it out loud together. Ready? None of us belongs to the Flat Earth Society. So if this is new to you, okay, don't go to the Flat Earth Society to look at what are these people about. They didn't sponsor this event. They have nothing to do with it. Neither do we. Speaking of, no one believes in the upward floating disk theory of gravity. Media, if you're in the room and you missed this morning, pay attention, look at the screen, please. We do not believe this. Okay? I can't tell you how many times I've seen news reports and stuff coming out saying, oh, that's what flat earthers believe. No, we don't. You can't just insert flat earth into the Copernican model of the universe. You see memes like this all the time, like, flat earthers be, yeah, sun 93 million miles, right? Mercury, Venus, pancake! No, we don't believe that. Speaking of that particular meme, Danny Faulkner just put out a book, and I've seen this meme going around. Danny Faulkner takes apart the flat earth movement in his new book, Falling Flat. Look at his front cover. I think it should be retitled, Misrepresents the Flat Earth. I'll just say this. I've spent time talking with Danny. I like him as a human being. I think we could probably be friends. I mean, I think he's a pretty cool guy, but when it comes to this issue, he's like the arch nemesis of flat earth. But I'm going to have to pull a Greta on you, Danny. How dare you! How many of these conferences have you been to? How much of our stuff? You know we don't believe that, so that's a complete misrepresentation. But he's not the only one. There's plenty of others out there doing it, the same thing. All the news media does it. Rational Wiki, on their flat earth entry, it says it's basically this, and they got the same picture. No, that's not true. And number 5, for Christians, the Bible is a flat earth book from cover to cover. I'm sorry, it just is. So that's part 1 of my presentation. I'm just going to go through this real quick. Others will be talking about it this weekend. Of course, if you're familiar with my work, I've got plenty of stuff on this online. But essentially, when you look through the scriptures, I appreciate Logos Bible Software. The scholars over there at Logos Bible Software do not believe the earth is flat. Say that again with me. They do not believe the earth is flat. Okay? They don't believe it. But they believe that the people who wrote the Bible did, which creates an interesting problem for them. It's like, look, you just make a really articulate case for this is what the words mean, this is what they clearly believed, and then you say you don't believe it. So I don't know what's up with that. But this is their depiction of the ancient Hebrew conception of the universe. I've gone a little deeper. This is not thus saith the Lord, okay? This is thus thinketh Rob. I'm not telling you this is where you live. I'm telling you this is what I see in my mind when I look at the ancient texts. As an artist, this is what I come up with. And according to all the references you see there, we see that we live in a self-contained 3-tiered system of heaven, earth, the underworld. There is a solid firmament, dome, vault over us, according to the text you see there. Yahuwah is the pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton that I've chosen. I don't get into fights with people about this. Some say Yahweh, King James says Jehovah, Yehovah. Look, we're talking about 4 consonants, and we're doing the best we can. The pronunciation I've landed on is Yahuwah, so if you hear that, that's what I'm referring to as the name of God. Yahuwah's throne sits above the heavens and the waters, according to the text you see there. The earth is inscribed in a circular, flat fashion into something with 4 corners and surrounded by water, according to the text you see there. The sun, moon, and stars are in the firmament, and by the way, all the stars are going to fall to earth, according to Isaiah, Yeshua, Jesus Christ, the Son of God himself, Peter, and John. The stars are falling to earth. We got big problems if Beetlejuice is headed our way, and followed by Andromeda, right? Somebody's lying to us here. And I'm not prepared to say that it's Isaiah, Yeshua, Peter, or John. There are floodgates, windows in the firmament. Earth is a geocentric, stationary world set on pillars. Indeed, from Genesis to Revelation, the earth is consistently described by Holy Spirit-inspired authors as fixed and not moving, spinning, orbiting, etc. Circular with edges, corners, pillars, foundations, etc. Under a dome within which the sun, moon, and stars were placed on day 4. Inside that structure that I showed you a minute ago is something that like the footstool of God right there. And I say, look, which model is a better fit for a stationary world set on a firm foundation of pillars under a solid dome within which the sun, moon, and stars move and which will accommodate all the stars falling to earth? I think it's a pretty easy answer when you look at that. Now, of course, those who disagree, who think the Bible it doesn't say this, they only got 2 scriptures. 2. And actually, neither one of them work for them. They have Isaiah's circle of the earth, and Job hangs the earth on nothing. Neither one of them work for them. Hangs the earth on nothing. The model that they believe is the earth in the Copernican model is literally hung on the gravity of the sun. So you can't even use that one. And circle doesn't mean ball. Doesn't mean sphere. For me, though, it really was the firmament. That was the one that just, it sealed the deal in more ways than one. Unquestionably, the thing is hard, firm, supporting the waters above, attached to the earth, within which Yahuwah placed the sun, moon, and stars, and upon which his throne sits. Clearly, this is a very important issue to Yahuwah. The only model that accommodates every aspect of the firmament is the circular, enclosed world model. The only way around this is to grossly misrepresent the scriptures, yanking the true meanings of the words used out of context and fantasizing about definitions for those words, which are not even remotely supported by the text nor the historical context in which the scriptures were written. Interestingly enough, I think this was just last week, some news articles came out just recently. Scientists, it says, our understanding of the cosmos could be fundamentally wrong, astronomers say. It says, our understanding of the universe could be fundamentally wrong, scientists have said. Newly released data from the Planck, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, telescope, which aimed to take very precise readings of the shape, size, and ancient history of our universe, suggests that there could be something wrong in our physics, according to a new paper. The issue could be an indication of a crisis in cosmology that may be as yet unrealized because of problems with our understanding of the shape of the universe, the authors of the new paper write. Scientists have long been convinced the universe was shaped like a sheet of paper. Interesting. They think the universe is flat, so why are they getting so upset about us when we're talking about the earth being flat? But a new paper suggests that could be wrong, and it's not flat, but rather closed. The authors of the new paper say that it is correct, if it is correct, that the data from the telescope there suggests we are inside a closed universe. Interesting. Other articles coming out, same thing. You know, this was like all just last week, so perfect setup for us. It reminds me of a quote I heard quite some time ago by an individual named Robert Jastrow. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. I think that's exactly what's starting to happen in mainstream science. Now, what I hear from people all the time, especially people who don't agree with what I'm saying here, is, Rob, you're making Christians look stupid. Have you guys heard that before? This is making Christians look stupid. Okay, if that's your big concern, right, if that's what you're so concerned about, I'm going to help you out here. All right, here's a news flash for you. We already look stupid. To pretty much everybody else out there that don't believe the same way we do. I mean, here are just a few of the crazy things we already believe in. A 6-day creation. They tell us the universe is almost 14 billion years old. To say that it was created in 6 literal days, completely absurd. We believe in 2 magic trees, a talking snake. Moses split the Red Sea with a staff that used to be a snake that could eat other staffs that turned into snakes. Interesting. A dude with a talking donkey, like on Shrek. The walls of Jericho come tumbling down with trumpet blasts. Joshua commanded the sun and the moon to stand still. Wow, that's pretty crazy. The length of a man's hair gave him superhuman strength. See, I'm growing my hair out. A few guys chilling out in a fiery furnace, remaining unharmed. A dude spends 3 days and 3 nights inside a fish, then gets out and starts preaching. Here's a big one for you. A Savior born of a virgin who walked on water, did miracles, died, rose again in 3 days, hung out for a few more weeks, then flew up into the sky like Superman with the promise of returning on a flying horse followed by a floating city. There are a lot more that I just couldn't fit on one slide, okay? So if your big concern is looking stupid, just embrace the madness. But, I knocked on our side of it a little bit here. Let's look at some really stupid things. Let's look at modern cosmology and science that I believe Scripture rightly defines as falsely so-called. Let's look at real stupid. Have you ever heard the game, you ever play the game Whisper Down the Lane, Whisper Down the Line, right? Who is most likely to have the truth, the one closest or the one farthest away from the original source information? Closest, right? So the further back we go, we see almost unanimously across the ancient world, they believe we are on a circular, still flat earth, set on pillars under a dome within which are the sun, moon, and stars. Now, there are variants within the cultures, but essentially you got the same model. Flash forward to the end of the line, and I heard we live on a spinning heliocentric ball in an ever-expanding universe. Something changed down the line, right? Now, when we think about the ancient past, who's smarter, us or them? I mean, the further back we go in time, the more we start seeing stuff like this. Megalithic structures and all kinds of stuff that people just can't, even today, with all our modern science and technology, we can't figure out how they did it. So what's the solution? Aliens must have done it. I mean, think about it. We're so smart, we think we came from monkeys, and we don't even know what gender we are anymore. I mean, How smart are we? Modern science is telling us that gender's fluid. No, I got news for you. It's not what's between your ears, it's what's between your legs that determines your gender. You know, for thousands of years, 6,000 years of recorded human history, nobody, regardless of race, color, creed, religion, doesn't matter. Baby pops out, got something hanging down there, great. Hey, it's a boy. No, it's a girl, that's awesome. Right? If you want to get scientific, got an X and Y chromosome, boy, got 2X girl. The fact that I actually have to explain this in the 21st century is proof of entropy. We're not getting better. We're getting worse. Way worse. Days of Noah, yeah, way worse. The only reason they think that way is because of evolution. So let's go after that. Let's talk about evolution and the big questions of how did we get here. Here's a video that explains more or less the current view of modern cosmology. Sound?
God created the universe went largely unchallenged until the Middle Ages, when scientists made a sacrilegious suggestion based on their observations. The sun, not the earth, was at the center of the universe.
It was a paradigm shift. There is now another way to explain the naturally occurring phenomena around us, and this is science.
Since the Middle Ages, scientists have developed sophisticated new theories about the enormity of the universe and our place in it. Theories that often have no room for God.
Many phenomena have appeared mysterious or miraculous or magical. And then through the process of science, we've eventually understood them. Scientists gradually realized that the sun really is just one star among a multitude of stars in a gigantic galaxy having hundreds of billions of such stars. And all this was created in a Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago.
But while scientific theories, observations, and experiments tell us where we are in the cosmos, they don't answer the eternal questions: why we're here, and who, if anyone, created us.
The amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today, okay? And anyway.
By the end of the 1920s, astronomer Edwin Hubble, working with the large 100-inch telescope atop Mount Wilson outside Los Angeles, had established that our galaxy was only one of many galaxies in the universe.
When we look out at other galaxies, on average, they're moving away from us. And those that are twice as far away are moving twice as fast. And those that are 3 times as far away are moving 3 times as fast. And of course, that makes us look like we're the center of the universe.
Such a condition would imply that we occupy a unique position in the universe, analogous, in a sense, to the ancient conception of a central Earth. This hypothesis cannot be disproved, but it is unwelcome and would only be accepted as a last resort in order to save the phenomena. Therefore, we disregard this possibility. The unwelcome position of a favored location must be avoided at all costs. Such a favored position is intolerable.
Several decades ago, we found a problem so great that it was brushed under the carpet for many a decade. And this is the fact that galaxies spin too fast. In fact, 10 times too fast. By rights, the galaxy should fly apart. Therefore, scientists said that we have to have dark matter, a halo of matter that surrounds the galaxy and holds the galaxy together.
And what have they discovered? Absolutely nothing. Zilch.
What is a little bit perturbing is that after 50 years, we still haven't found what the dark matter is. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean they're not there. It just means they're harder to find than we thought.
We look out in the universe, and 85% of all the gravity that's out there has some mysterious, unknown source. We add up all the stars, the galaxies, the planets, the comets, the black holes, the dark clouds, everything out there that we can see, touch, smell, or taste. And it doesn't add up to give us the gravity that we see operating in this universe. So really, we should be calling it the dark force, because we don't know if it's made of matter. It could be a profound misnomer, sending people off in thought directions that might not really be the right path. So dark matter is just simply what we call this thing about which we know nothing, responsible for 85% of the gravity of the cosmos. It is the longest standing unsolved problem in modern astrophysics. Dark matter, dark energy. Everything we know about the universe, what we're made of, galaxies, stars, planets, that's all right here. So, according to this chart, we are 96% stupid.
So the problem with cosmology is that we keep inventing theories, ad hoc theories, to try to explain the data, such as inflation, dark matter, dark energy, and so on, just to keep patching the theory up.
There is a crisis in cosmology. Usually in science, if we're off by a factor of 2 or a factor of 10, we call that horrible. We say something's wrong with the theory. We're off by a factor of 10. However, in cosmology, we're off by a factor of 10 to the 120. That is 1 with 120 zeros after it. This is the largest mismatch between theory and experiment in the history of science.
A very large number of universes, perhaps even an infinite number, could in principle exist in a vast hyperspace.
We can understand the idea of hyperspace by comparing it to a mug of beer.
The beer mug would be the hyperspace, and the bubbles would be these individual universes. The bubbles in a beer mug are all physically about the same. But suppose they span a range of properties. Some of them might have carbon and oxygen, and stars and gravity, and others don't. We would be in one of the ones that leads to a rich, complex universe culminating with life as we know it.
If there are an infinite number of other universes, the fine-tuning that seems to be present in ours isn't an example of God's plan, but rather the law of statistics. Most of these universes wouldn't naturally develop in ways that fostered intelligent life, but a few would.
So then the explanation for the specialness of the universe is that we are winners in a gigantic cosmic lottery. It stands to reason that we couldn't be living and discussing this in a universe that was hostile to life. Only the bio-friendly ones get populated with thinking beings.
Having a multitude of universes is actually quite a simple and natural consequence of some of the most favored models for the birth and early evolution of our universe. It's kind of like stars and planets. As long as you have the capacity to make one, it's easy to make lots of them.
Oh, really? Wow! Beer mug hyperspace multi-bubble verse. Really?
Beer.
Seriously? They're farting out beer bubble universes. Okay? That's what they're doing. Hey, I got an idea. Yep. Multi-beer bubble universe. And they call that science. And they make fun of us? Really? Yeah, I'm not going to take that from them anymore. I'm not going to sit here and let people who think they came from monkeys out of a beer bubble universe ridicule me for looking into what I'm looking into and considering, a possibility. If you guys can think about beer bubble universes, then I can think about a snow globe. Fair enough? Okay, let's move on. Thank you. That's what they're calling science. So again, Christian, if you're worried about looking stupid, look at what they believe. Wow. It just gets crazier and crazier. I mean, talking about being off by 10 to the 120th power. Really? I think Nikola Tesla had it right, and he was starting to see it already in his day, in the beginning of the 20th century, right? Today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. That's exactly what's happening. And you're seeing more and more articles popping up like this. This is just from a few months ago, April 30th, 2019, Scientific American. Cosmology has some big problems. If you read the article, it talks about, this individual right here says, compounding this problem, most observations of the universe occur experientially and indirectly. Pay attention here. Today's space telescopes provide no direct view of anything. They produce measurements through an interplay of theoretical predictions and pliable parameters in which the model that they've concocted in their head is involved every step of the way. The framework literally frames the problem. It determines, where and how to observe. And so, despite the advanced technologies and methods involved, the profound limitations to the endeavor also increase the risk of being led astray by the kind of assumptions that cannot be calculated. He goes on to say, a key piece of the Big Bang paradigm was criticized by one of the theory's original proponents for having become indefensible as a scientific theory. Why? Because inflation theory relies on ad hoc contrivances to accommodate almost any data, and because this proposed physical field is not based on anything with empirical justification. This is probably because a crucial function of inflation is to bridge the transition from an unknowable Big Bang to a physics we can recognize today. So is it science or convenient invention? He concludes his article by admitting, quote, in order to maintain a mathematically unified theory valid for the entire universe, we must accept that 95% of our cosmos is furnished by completely unknown elements and forces for which we have no empirical evidence whatsoever. I just summarize that by saying, you know what is taught today as fact is really nothing more than unproven ad hoc theories based on presupposition derived from outlandish conjecture, which itself was contrived from sheer fantasy, all of which ends up beautifully illustrated by the hands of artists and published in textbooks as self-evident truth. That's what science has turned into today. All right, so let's move from the origin of the cosmos to issues of the earth and talking about the age of the earth and so forth. How old is the earth and how do we know? Well, for a long time, there's been sort of this war between the ideas of uniformitarianism versus the older ideas of catastrophism. Charles Lyell's multi-volume Principles of Geology was published in the early 1830s. Its subtitle was An Attempt to Explain the Former Changes of the Earth's Surface by Reference to Causes Now in Operation. He was one of the major advocates of an idea known as uniformitarianism, that the Earth was shaped entirely by slow-moving forces still in operation today, acting over a very long period of time. This stood in direct opposition to catastrophism, which described geological changes coming about as the result of abrupt, violent changes. Thus, characters like Charles Lyell looked at the stripes in the rocks, right, and he just assumed millions of years. No proof, nothing. That's the best, that's his best explanation right there. But is it really the best explanation for what we see and how accurate are our dating methods to begin with? I'm reminded of an analogy Kent Hovind used to give, talking about a creationist and an evolutionist looking out over the Grand Canyon. One of them looks at the Grand Canyon and says, wow, look at what the Colorado River did over millions of years. And the creationist says, wow, look what the flood of Noah did in a couple days. Your preconceived bias, right, determines how you look at the thing. Now, I already told you I come from a biblical worldview. So let's have a look at what the Bible has to say as a more plausible explanation for some of these things. And interestingly enough, as a young person, I stumbled across the works of this guy right here. How many of you ever heard of Immanuel Velikovsky? Anybody? Not a lot of people here. A couple of interesting books right there, Worlds in Collision and Earth in Upheaval. Those two books actually were instrumental in leading my dad to Christ in a bar in Vietnam. A guy was selling books there. He got those books, started reading them, and my dad was more like an agnostic at the time. But it got him to begin to question the paradigm and evolutionary thought and whatnot, and eventually he became a Christian himself. So those two books have quite a bit of meaning to me on a personal level. But here's a little video I cut together from some of the creation ministries talking about a better explanation for the geological features and the dating of the Earth.
Isn't there evidence for millions of years? And how do we understand all that? Well, first of all, let's look at what the Bible says. If you take the days of creation as ordinary days, and you take all those genealogies in Scripture, if you add it all up, 5 days before Adam, from Adam to Abraham, and then you add up from Abraham until today, you get about 6,000 years. Now, what about all the dating methods that seem to indicate billions of years? Actually, there are hundreds and hundreds of dating methods that you can use to age date things on the Earth. See, one creation scientist I know makes this statement. He says 90% of the methods you can use to age date things on the Earth contradict the billions of years. Only 10% even seem to give the billions of years. But all dating methods have fallible assumptions.
Nearly every textbook in Science magazine teaches that the Earth is billions of years old, and the primary dating method used for determining this is what is called radioisotope dating, or radiometric dating. Now, this is a reliable method for measuring absolute ages of rocks and the age of the Earth, right? First off, many scientists now regard the age of the Earth to be between 4.55 and 4.6 billion years old. Okay, so if this method is reliable and accurate, why the 50 million year discrepancy? That seems like a lot. But let's get into some details here and see what's going on. Keep in mind that there's all kinds of scientific jargon on this topic, and so we'll just present a very straightforward, simplified version. Radiometric dating is the process of estimating the ages of rocks based on the decay into other kinds of atoms. For instance, uranium will radioactively decay through a series of steps until it becomes the stable element called lead. The original element is called the parent element, and the end result is called the daughter element. Radioisotope dating is commonly used to date igneous rocks, rocks which formed when hot molten material cooled and solidified. The dating clock started when the rock cooled. During the molten state, it is assumed that the intense heat forced any gaseous daughter elements to escape. It is assumed that once the rock cooled, no more atoms escaped, and any daughter element now found in the rock is a result of radioactive decay since that rock formed. The decay rate is measured in terms of half-life. That is the length of time it takes half of the remaining atoms of a radioactive parent element to decay. Now, of course, that can be measured in a laboratory, and it is assumed that since we know the decay rate, we can calculate backwards and come up with the age of the rock. But is that all there is to it? Here's where it gets tricky. It's true we can measure a decay rate using observational science, but there's another kind of science that is required to accurately calculate dates for rocks, and that is what we call historical science. Historical science deals with the things in the past, and therefore it cannot be repeated and tested. Dating methods require both types of science, because in order to get accurate rock dates, one would have to accurately know both the decay rate and the initial conditions of the rock sample, right? Since radioisotope dating uses both types of science, we can't directly measure the ages of rocks. There are assumptions involved. For instance, how do we know what the initial conditions were in the rock sample? How do we know the amounts of parent or daughter elements now in that sample haven't been altered by other processes in the past? How does someone know the decay rate has remained constant since the rock formed? The answer is they don't. Let's simplify here and talk about a typical hourglass. Let's say you walk into a room and you see an hourglass with sand at the top and sand at the bottom, and some sand sprinkling from the top chamber to the bottom. Well, observational science would allow us to see and measure the sand, and then calculate how long the hourglass has been running, right? We could make our sand measurements and then calculate when the hourglass was turned over, right? Well, those calculations could be wrong, because we may have failed to consider some major assumptions, like, was there any sand at the bottom when the hourglass was turned over? Has any sand been added or taken out of the hourglass? Has the sand always been falling at a constant rate? Since we did not observe the initial conditions when the hourglass started, and we haven't been watching the sand all the time since then, we must make assumptions. All three of those assumptions can affect our time calculations. Now, of course, there's more to understanding all of this, but enough said.
The Earth's surface is scarred by deep canyons, cut into solid rock. But how did they form? A little bit of water over a long time, or a little bit of time with a lot of water? Modern rivers don't generally cut downward into solid rock, so today's river erosion seems incapable of explaining rock canyons. The Great Flood of the Bible, however, provides a possible explanation for such canyons. On May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens, located 95 miles south of Seattle, Washington, erupted. The eruption was triggered by an earthquake centered beneath the mountain that measured 5.1 on the Richter scale. The lateral blast swept out the north side of Mount St. Helens at 300 miles per hour. With temperatures as high as 660 degrees Fahrenheit and the power of 24 megatons of thermal energy, it snapped 100-year-old trees like toothpicks and stripped them of their bark.
Now, eventually, lava flows formed a new dome. 5 new domes, actually, all of which were destroyed by subsequent eruptions. But the 6th dome that formed between October 1980 and 86 is what you see today. It's composed of 2.6 billion cubic feet of lava, and it's quite young, having finished forming just over 30 years ago. Well, in 1996, geologists sent rocks from the lava dome to be radiometrically dated. Now, they used a method called potassium argon. Well, scientists measured how much potassium and how much argon are in the rock, and they calculate the age of the rock, right? But creation scientists have pointed out for years that there are some major problems with radiometric dating. One big one is all of the assumptions that it's grounded on. You must assume that the half-life is constant and that it never varies. You have to assume that there was no contamination. For example, no argon was present in the sample before the decay began. Well, that's a lot of unprovable assumptions. Now, if radiometric dating and the assumptions that it's founded on were accurate, well then Mount St. Helens rocks should have yielded very young ages. After all, the rock was merely about a decade old. You see, the problem is they didn't. The rock gave an age of 350,000 years. When they dated the minerals within the rock, the problem got much worse. They gave dates of 2.4 million years. This is for a 10-year-old rock. Now, Mount St. Helens highlighted that we shouldn't blindly trust the dates given by radiometric dating. The assumptions clearly aren't accurate, so the dates that they give are also inaccurate. Instead of trusting a method that doesn't even give correct ages for rocks of known age, well, maybe we should trust the Bible's history, which tells us that our Earth is around 6,000 years old.
Before the famous eruption at Mount St. Helens, scientists were mostly familiar with slow-acting examples of geologic change. But at Mount St. Helens, geologists watched the Earth's surface change quite rapidly. Icebergs were buried in hot avalanche material. They melted and formed badlands in days. Eruptions on May 18 and June 10 produced fine layers in hours. On June 10, mud flows cut zigzag canyons 100 feet deep in soft sand and mud, complete with perpendicular side canyons. Canyons that are reminiscent of the geography of Grand Canyon, only 40 times smaller and clearly produced within hours. At Mount St. Helens, a single mud flow off the mountain carved Engineers Canyon out of soft sediment in a single day, 100 feet deep. And the same thing even happened in solid rock. A series of mud flows created Lewitt and Step canyons on the front face of Mount St. Helens, cutting hundreds of feet into solid rock over just a few years. Grand Canyon is a good example where we find evidence of catastrophic forces at work. Upstream is evidence of huge lakes. These lakes would never have formed if the canyon were already open below them. However, if these lakes had formed from rains after Noah's flood, and if the pressure of these waters broke through and carved through the recently deposited sediments, then we would expect to find surge deposits downstream. Below Grand Canyon, this is precisely what we find. Evidence of a lot of water cutting over a little bit of time. Even though Mount St. Helens is a very small catastrophe compared to the flood or the major catastrophes immediately following the flood, it provides a better clue to what happened in those times than the slow geologic processes which are most commonly seen in the present.
All right. Now that we've established that the Big Bang is complete and utter nonsense, and our dating methods are also full of crap, let's take a look at the absurdity of biological evolution. This is a typical description of biological evolution you might see, charts and things of like this, made out of a blob or in the image of God. Darwin and the standard model of evolution, right? How many of you have heard that we share 98% of our genome with chimpanzees? Have you guys heard that before, taught in school? You know, that's one of the reasons they say we evolved from apes, because we supposedly share 98% of our genome with chimps. Okay, the clip I'm about to show you is not from a creationist. It's from an evolutionary-minded group of people describing how they got those numbers. Check it out.
Compare the chimp and human genomes, those single-letter differences were easy to tally, but the big mismatch sections weren't. For example, if a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatch sections. a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours.
Yeah, that makes sense. What? That wouldn't make sense in any other context. Nobody would buy that, right? Wow, okay. And this is why more and more scientists, even secular scientists, are starting to steer away from the standard Darwinian model. It's so full of holes and assumptions. In fact, when Francis Crick and James Watson discovered DNA, they immediately knew this could not have evolved by random chance mutation. So what is their solution? Aliens! Aliens must have done it, right? The late Nobel Prize winner, Professor Francis Crick, along with British chemist Leslie Oriel, proposed the theory of directed panspermia in 1973. A co-discoverer of the double helical structure of DNA molecule, Crick found it impossible that the complexity of DNA could have evolved naturally. So good thing Giorgio wasn't around back then, right? Panspermia, I don't know, therefore aliens. The idea of panspermia was born. The idea of ancient aliens must have seeded our world, kick-started evolution. And this is now becoming the new standard. Thus, when asked if intelligent design was a plausible solution to the evolution of man, this is what Professor Richard Dawkins had to say.
Or to teach the controversy, to teach both theories. But there aren't two theories. There's only one theory around. There's only one game in town as far as serious science is concerned. Of course, you get negative reactions from creationists, but who cares about creationists? They don't know anything.
We're Johnny-come-latelys. We live in the cosmic boondocks. We emerged from microbes and muck. Apes are our cousins.
You don't believe that the Earth is round only if you're an astronaut. You don't believe Napoleon existed only if you're a historian. You believe these things because they're facts proved by evidence. Evolution is also a demonstrated fact. The truth really is out there. It's not a matter of opinion.
You have written that God is a psychotic delinquent invented by mad, deluded people.
No, I didn't say quite that. I said something rather better than that.
Oh, well, please tell us what you said. Please tell us what you said.
Well, I would have to read it from the book.
No, please.
The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it. A petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak. A vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser. A misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
So that's what you think of God?
Yeah.
So you believe it's liberating to tell people that there is no God?
I think a lot of people, when they give up God, feel a great sense of release and freedom.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No. Nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else.
Evolution is a fact. It's documented by science.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know. Believe these things because they're facts proved by evidence.
So you have no idea how it started?
No. Nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the detailed details of biochemistry, molecular biology, you might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe.
Well,
but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
Many people are extremely illogical.
I'm skeptical of the claim.
I'm skeptical.
I'm skeptical.
Yes,
skeptical.
I'm skeptical.
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 Skeptical of claims
for the ability of random mutations and natural selection
to account for the complexity. Complexity. The complexity. The complexity.
to account for the complexity of life.
Careful examination.
Examination
Of the evidence.
for Darwinian theory
Should be encouraged.
Yep. So we have a crisis in cosmology and apparently a crisis in biology going on at the same time. You know, if biological evolution here requires the intervention of intelligence, who created those other beings? You see, all they're doing is pushing the problem further out. You know, eventually you got to get to a first cause. And ideally, you really got to get to how does a first self-replicating cell manifest itself out of non-living material, right? I mean, you got to get, you can't just go to chimps. You got to go further back than that, right? Well, I mean, they're forced to go on faith. Ooh, that's that crazy religious word, right? Because they have no evidence for what they're talking about. And yet, over and over and over again, we're seeing stuff like this, aren't we? Article after article talking about other Earth-like planets out there. You know, there could be 1 billion Earths in our galaxy alone, 40 billion, 8.8 billion. Oh, and incidentally, they're finding all these Earths by looking through telescopes millions of light years away, or even thousands of light years away. Both are absurd. You know how far a light year is? Yeah, it's nearly 6 trillion miles. They're telling us they're spotting black holes 55 million light years away. If they got telescopes that powerful, turn the telescope on the moon. I want to count the rivets on the buggy. Or shut up. You're full of crap. There's no way you're looking that far out there, but they're always pumping it in your head. There's other Earths-like out there because they have to. They have to prop up their theory, you know, that there are ancient aliens out there. Over and over and over again. Well, this next video shows how life forming from non-living matter is simply impossible, whether we're talking about here on Earth or elsewhere in the cosmos.
It is belief in the absence of evidence. Now, I don't propose to tell anybody what to believe, but for me, believing when there's no compelling evidence is a mistake. The idea is to withhold belief until there is compelling evidence.
When I talk to the public about astronomy and this question of life elsewhere in the universe, the most commonly held viewpoint I encounter is surely it's impossible that we could be alone in the universe. After all, how could it be amongst this unimaginable number of opportunities for life to get going? It only happened once, only here. And this is a viewpoint held by many scientists and talking heads in popular media too.
Do you think that there is life outside of Earth, intelligent life in the universe?
Absolutely, there is life elsewhere, and almost certainly intelligent life. It has to be. The odds are just overwhelming. There's 200 billion stars in this galaxy. Well, now it looks like every star has about 10 planets, so there's almost certainly intelligent life.
I assume it's the most frequently asked question, are we alone? My best guess is that the universe is teeming with life.
There's surely other civilizations out there in the universe. There are 350 billion galaxies out there in the universe.
But an argument based solely on statistical grounds comes with a fatal flaw. And that is that it is perfectly plausible that the probability of life starting from scratch, which we call abiogenesis, is a number which is so small that it greatly outweighs the number of opportunities, the number of worlds out there in the universe for life to get going. For example, if the probability of life beginning is 1 in septillion, say, then the case for a crowded universe evaporates. What is the probability of abiogenesis? At a basic level, we certainly know that no lab experiment here on Earth has ever succeeded in creating what we would call life from chemical broths with conditions similar to that of the early Earth. This was first famously attempted by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey in 1952 at the University of Chicago. In what is now often considered the classic abiogenesis experiment, they exposed a beaker of water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen to gentle heating and electrical sparks which emulated lightning. Now, many organic molecules were produced in this experiment, including 20 amino acids. But neither in that experiment, nor in any experiment since, have we observed the spontaneous production of complex proteins, nor DNA, nor indeed something crawling out of the test tube.
Language is recognizable, even if you can't read it. Take Morse code. It has 3 basic parts: dots, dashes, and spaces. These 3 simple parts are combined to represent letters. There are 26 letters in the English language, which are combined to form over 400,000 words. Those words can, of course, be combined into an infinite number of sequences or sentences. There is evidence that DNA represents a language. 4 basic units, called nucleotides, combine into a code for 20 amino acids. From those few amino acids, the body forms more than 100,000 proteins. Even if you can't read DNA, it still has all the hallmarks of language, a language that biologists are just now beginning to crack. Every tiny cell in our body is packed with 3 feet of DNA, 3 billion nucleotides. The similarity between DNA and human language is uncanny. In addition to codes, both use similar techniques to pack, access, rearrange, copy, and translate information. DNA seems to represent a language, the language of life. An unseen author, the creator of heaven and earth, has left a testimony of his existence in the DNA of every living thing.
For those who believe in evolution, they believe that matter gave rise to life. You've got to understand, matter had to give rise to zillions and zillions and zillions and zillions of bits of information. And over millions of years, information keeps coming from matter, new information to form all the different kinds of animals and plants, zillions of bits of information. You know what's interesting? We've never seen matter produce 1 bit of brand new information that never previously existed. Not even 1 bit.
When one looks at a typical textbook, one will see some prehistoric pond and molecules, and those molecules coming together and forming a cell, and those cells coming together and some slithering creature coming out of this pond. That is fallacious. There is no truth in that.
This is a cell. What is the origin of life? How do you get a cell like this? What is the origin of something like this? This is an amazing machine. A cell is an amazing machine. It's not just a blob of protoplasm. Every day, it gets harder to have the origin of life, to come up with a scenario, because the origin of life becomes more and more complex every day. A cell is a factory. It has the lipid bilayer, which is extremely selective to let certain things in and not other things. It has all of this substructure in here, these little areas where energy is made in here. It has these microtubules which can form, so you can move matter from point A to point B. If you go to a factory, what you see is these overhead hanging machines that are moving materials from point A to point B. In these systems, and the way they do this is they build these racks, but same thing happens in a cell. You get these microtubules to move material from point A to point B, and then as soon as the material is done moving, the microtubule breaks down and then assembles some other place. You say, well, why doesn't it leave it there? Because then the cell would become too rigid. So it just rebuilds it. It's just amazing factory what's happening in a cell. This is what we have to make. If we want to have origin of life, you got to start here. You don't start here. You start with a single cell. Just build a single cell. That's what we have to do in origin of life. Nobody has ever done this. If you've been taught that simple forms of life have been made, that is a lie that you are believing. Somebody told you a lie. That has never been done. Organisms care about life. Molecules don't care. Chemistry, on the contrary, is utterly indifferent to life. Without a biologically derived entity acting upon them, molecules have never been shown to evolve toward life. Never. Molecules don't care about life. They don't know anything about moving toward life. They have no brain. Organisms want to move toward life and keep life going. Molecules don't care about life. Nobody has ever seen molecules assemble toward life. Never. It doesn't happen without a biological entity working on them. I asked all my colleagues, can you show me an example of this? Of molecules moving toward order, moving toward an ordered system where you have a non-regular assembly. Regular assembly is like A, or A, That you can get pure thermodynamic assembly. But non-ordered assembly is a non-regular pattern. That's what you have in DNA. We know from computer science you have to have non-regular patterns in order to have complexity for living systems. And I asked my colleagues, do you have any example of molecules without a biological entity acting upon them, moving to give an ordered assembly that is a non-regular pattern? And they sent me papers where chemists have taken molecules and assembled them in that way. I said, non-biological entity. You can't have a human doing this. Molecules don't move toward life. Well, even if you want to have molecules move toward life and you have human beings working upon them, can the human beings do it? And the answer is no. So almost every chemical synthesis experiment in origin of life research can be summed up by a protocol analogous to this. They purchase chemicals generally in high purity from a chemical company. All right, so that's what they do. They first purchase the chemicals. They mix those chemicals together in water in high concentrations in a specific order under some set of carefully devised conditions in a modern lab. Then they can obtain a mixture of compounds that have a resemblance to one or more of the basic 4 classes of chemicals needed for life. So what you need for life is you need carbohydrates, nucleic acids, amino acids, and lipids. That's what we know. All life we know composes those 4 building blocks. So they try to make those 4 building blocks. Then they publish a paper making bold assertions about origin of life from these functionless crude mixtures of stereochemically scrambled intermediates, much like Miller did in 1952. Nothing has changed in 66 years. Nothing. Nothing's changed. Exactly where we were in 1952 is exactly where we have remained. Think about what's been done in science in the past 60 years. Nothing has changed in origin of life studies in 66 years. That's important to realize. Then you engage with the ever gullible press to dial up the knob of unjustified extrapolations. Watch the mesmerized layperson exclaim, "You see, scientists understand how life formed." Then you encourage a generation of science textbook writers to make colorful, deceptive cartoons of raw chemicals assembling from cells which then emerge as slithering creatures from a prehistoric pond. That is exactly what is done every one of their experiments.
So what do I say when someone asks me, do you believe there is life elsewhere in the universe? Carl Sagan once famously wrote that faith is belief in the absence of evidence. And honestly, any scientist who says there has to be life out there is putting forward a position of faith, not one supported by observational evidence and statistical reasoning.
So where are we putting our faith, ultimately? When it comes to belief, here are our choices. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he made us in his own image. Or, in the beginning, nothing farted out the heavens and the earth that we got here from Goo to You by way of the zoo. Or, nothing farted out the heavens and the earth, and E.T. seeded the goo to make you. Basically, these are our choices, guys. When you proceed from a false premise, your conclusions are going to be sheer madness. This is why we have so many crisis scenarios going on in so-called modern science. And it brings me to my last slide here. Which one is it then? We have all our government-funded textbooks telling us we live on an oblate spheroid. We have this guy saying, no, you live on a pear. It's a pear shape. You have NASA and other government organizations like NASA showing us perfectly spherical worlds, and then you have the Bible saying, nope, you live in a snow globe. So which one is it? I say, look, as for me and my house, let God be true and every man a liar. You can laugh at me, you can mock me for saying that, but if you believe you're an evolved ape that got here from goo to you by way of the zoo out of a rock that was spit out of a exploding dot, you don't have the intellectual high ground in this discussion. Sorry to break it to you. And when it comes to evidence, you know, my whole life experience points to the truth of the scriptures. I've had no reason to doubt it. And then when you start seeing other evidences like this, it just confirms all the more that I'm going to trust it for cosmology as well. Thank you.